Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's Economics in Action show presented by the McNair Center for the Advancement of Free Enterprise and Entrepreneurship at Northwood University in conjunction with Midland Community Television. I'm your host today. My name is Mackenzie Castle. I'm the Director of Public Relations at Northwood University. Joining me is Dr. Tim Nash.
I'm Mackenzie.
Tim is the Director of the McNair Center, and Josh Weckesser, a Northwood economics student. We're going to jump right in today for the August and early September economic outlook. Dr. Nash, how is the U.S. economy doing generally?
Overall, Mackenzie, the U.S. economy is doing very well. But we'd like to start the show with a quote from one of my all-time favorite economists, Dr. Thomas Sowell at Stanford's Hoover Institution. And Dr. Sowell is very fond of saying that the first lesson of economics is scarcity, that there's never enough of anything for people to truly be satisfied with all the things that they want. And then he goes on to say that the first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. And the reason why I think that quote is timely today is that our one major concern about the economy today and moving forward is our U.S. national debt. It's roughly $21 trillion. It's growing. The pace of growth is slowing a little bit, but not much. And so the concern with all the good things you're about to hear is that the U.S. national debt and Democrats and Republicans need to get together and address the fact that we have to get the debt under control, and we have to look at both ways to generate more revenue and simultaneously ways to reduce government spending. Having said that, if you look at GDP, our last show relative to today, you'll see that this is a new slide because we've revised upward GDP growth. And the second report on GDP came out just recently by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And instead of the U.S. economy growing at 4.1%, it actually grew at 4.2% in the second quarter. And the thing that's impressive about that is that the U.S. economy is now growing over the past 4 quarters, or the past 12 months, at 3.15%. And that is darn near our post-World War II average before the Great Recession. Will it continue? Hopefully, but it certainly has been impressive economic growth over the last 4 quarters, or the last year. And as you take a look at it, it's also impressive when you look at growth since the Great Recession. From the trough of the Great Recession in 2009 until just recently, the U.S. economy was growing at just under 2%. And thus this recent growth of 3.9% over the last year is impressive, and certainly seems to be something that is continuing. Leading the economy, leading the charge, is the fact that unemployment, once again in August, was at 3.9%. Again, some of the best unemployment figures in 4 decades, and certainly prolonged unemployment below 4.5% and now below 4%. Mm-hmm. The second key factor there is job growth. And as you look at job growth, the August job numbers that just came out a few days ago were very impressive. Job growth in the United States was 201,000 new jobs in August. That was about 10,000 more than most economists were expecting. And if you look at job growth relative to where we are right now, the pace so far in 2018 is the best job growth since 2015, if it continues throughout the rest of the year. So, the U.S. economy, as it relates to job growth, is doing very, very well. The thing that we always talk about, and one of the key things that are of most importance to the McNair Center, is how is business looking at the economy, and especially how are entrepreneurs looking at the economy. And so as you take a look at business confidence, which we clearly believe is what's driving the success of the economy. There's, I think, a strong correlation between the fact that we have a pro-business president, at least a perceived pro-business president in the White House. And you can see business confidence moving upward at the large scale level and for entrepreneurs. And so if you look at the Business Confidence Index by the Conference Board, it's at 133.4. You can see a fairly sizable jump from July and very close to being among the best the Conference Board has reported in decades. If you look at the Small Business Index, which really measures the entrepreneur, the backbone of this economy, those businesses of 200 employees or smaller, new business, new startups, that level is at an all-time record high in August. It was 108.8. It's the highest level since the index was developed almost 50 years ago. So the reason for optimism on the business side, and the reason why we track it so closely, is that it's the entrepreneur, it's the business person that creates the jobs. Government is important. Government is necessary. But you wouldn't have a government without a successful business class. You wouldn't have households without a successful business class, a successful group of risk takers that start businesses, that create jobs, that allow for taxes to be paid, that allow for churches to be built, and Little League baseball teams to be formed, and all the good things that we find in this economy, and the literally hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars annually given to charity by people that have a job and have income that they can afford to share with others. So this, perhaps, slide 7, is perhaps the most important news right now, is that there's a strong congruence between the large confidence index, which measures big companies, individuals across the country, and the small business confidence index, which measures the entrepreneurs, those companies today that will be the large Fortune 500 companies in 10 or 20 years. Another, I think, variable that's important to take a look at is that the stock market is really beginning to pick up. And if you remember last month, it was up about a little over 2.5% for the first half of the year. Mm-hmm. And it's now up 5.8% in early September. If you calculate this on an annualized basis, the stock market will be up roughly 9% for the year. It's not quite what it was last year, but even our concerns in previous shows about the performance of the stock market are somewhat lessened by the fact that the stock market is increasing at a faster pace in the last month. And so that is something that we look at, and we certainly are very pleased with. The other, I think, variable on a national economy is the fact that wages, for the first time in August, were up, and they were up just under 3%. So if you look at August of 2017 and you compare August of 2017 to August of 2018, it was up 2.9%. And that, even adjusted for inflation, is a real increase in wages. And we haven't had much of that, literally, Mackenzie, for about 10 years. And so this was really the last sign that the economy is recovering, and is recovering in a strong way coming out of the Great Recession. So if this continues with wages, this is going to be an unprecedented move over at least the last 10 years in the economy. Also, as you take a look at the economy, we think it would be important for our viewers to take a look at maybe some things that are more regional or more localized, in the sense that in a month we'll be releasing our annual study for the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. And we have some op-eds coming out in newspapers in Michigan on the study, and it's a study that gets national attention because it ranks Michigan against all 50 states. And it ranks Michigan in taxes, it ranks Michigan in regulations and cost of things like automobile insurance or a gallon of gasoline. And the thing that's most important is any state could take our study and make it a centric study to their state. So the beauty of it is we've done the study in Texas, we've done it for West Virginia, we've done it for Illinois, and it's interesting to see how states have progressed, especially over a 20-year period of time. And if you look at this first slide from our study, we're measuring U.S. GDP growth in the Great Lakes region. Now, the Great Lakes region, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, there are six regions across the United States, and the Great Lakes region is Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And you can see that whether you're looking at nominal economic growth, you're looking at real GDP, or you're looking at GDP per capita or by population, Michigan has done extremely well coming out of the Great Recession. And if you just take a look at from 2007 to 2017, Michigan was best in the Great Lakes region and 11th nationally in nominal GDP growth at 4%. The country as a whole grew at 3.8%. Michigan grew at 1.9%, adjusted for inflation, real GDP, and was 15th overall in the country, a little bit behind the national average in real GDP. But then you take real GDP and divide it by the population, and Michigan grew at 1.8% and was tied for 5th in the country, while the nation as a whole grew at 1.3%. Now, the reason why per capita GDP is so important is that if you look at, just take a simple example of China. China is the second largest economy by country in the world. Third largest if you look at the European Union. It'd be the United States, European Union, China, and if you look at it by country, it's the United States and then China. China has a GDP of, depending on whose data you look at, roughly $11 trillion. And that's very large, that's very impressive. The United States is about $21 trillion. But the real issue that's impressive when it comes into play is divide the US number by 330 million, divide the Chinese number by almost 1.4 billion, and you'll see that Chinese per capita income is dramatically lower than US per capita income. And so it's on average, what does a human being or a citizen, a worker have to spend? And you can do it by population, you can do it by the number of people that are employed, and that tends to be one of the most impressive and most important measurements for the growth of a state. And Michigan clearly has been a great performer from 2011 to 2017. What's important to also note as you look at our next slide, and this will be in an op-ed coming out next week, is that if you look at the United States relative to Michigan prior to 2011, so you're looking at almost the first decade of the 21st century, and you're really looking at the data and the events that led up to and taking Michigan through the Great Recession. And if you look at it, the nominal GDP, the U.S. grew at 3.8%. Michigan grew at 0.3% in nominal GDP. So that's not adjusting for inflation. Michigan was last in the Great Lakes region, and Michigan was last in the country over that period for nominal GDP growth. In terms of real GDP growth, that's overall GDP, overall production of goods and services, adjusted for inflation. The U.S. economy over that period grew at 1.4%. Michigan grew at 1.6%, and it was negative. It was a negative 1.6%. We were last in the Great Lakes region, and we were last in the United States. And then that all-important measurement, per capita GDP growth, the U.S. economy grew at 0.4% from 2003 to 2010. Michigan grew at minus 1.3%. We were last in the Great Lakes region, and we were 49th nationally. And finally, as you look at our last slide relative to a local part of the U.S., if you look at GDP growth rates and you then start to look at local or metropolitan areas, there's something called gross metropolitan product. GDP is gross national product. GSP is gross state product. And GMP is gross metropolitan product. National, state, local. There are 383 locales or local areas in the United States. And what's important, as we look at our McNair Center here at Northwood University being located in Midland, Michigan, You can see that Grand Rapids, which is the second largest city in Michigan, Midland, which is the 13th of the 15 GMPs in our gross metropolitan areas in Michigan. Midland's the 13th largest. But if you look at this, you can see how well Grand Rapids and Midland, but especially Midland, performed versus the nation. And you can see here that Midland was either first or second in the state, and nationally, Michigan performed at a level that was fifth as it relates to per capita GDP. So the fact of the matter is, a lot of great things happening in Michigan, and we believe a lot of that had to do with the tax and regulatory cuts by Governor Snyder, who's in his 8th year right now. So in conclusion, as you look at the Michigan economy, our concern is still that national debt. Our concern is real and is something that needs to be dealt with. 49 out of 50 states have a balanced budget amendment. We really believe something like that has to be adopted at the federal level. But in conclusion, we think there's a strong job market. Wages are improving. If you look at a number of the different variables, the stock market is strong. R&D is strong. And when you're looking at business investment and, quite frankly, the Great Lakes and the Michigan economy, they're all looking strong on a national and a regional level. So, again, a very good report card for the economy right now.
It's great. Sounds like a good report card for the state of Michigan.
Absolutely.
We look forward to the chamber study coming out of the McNair Center this fall. As you mentioned, a couple op-eds going to be appearing shortly. Leading into that, we'll kind of move over. We heard a lot about entrepreneurs, Josh, a lot about what they can do for our economy and how they are a huge part of the growth of our economy. So who is our Entrepreneur of the Month this month?
So I'm pleased to announce that for the August Entrepreneur of the Month, we are going to celebrate the life of Rich DeVos. And as you have probably heard, Mr. DeVos passed away just this last week at the age of 92. And Mr. DeVos was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan on March 4th of 1926. And he's been widely regarded around the world as an entrepreneur and as an innovator and someone who's really determined to free enterprise and promoting free practice through business. Mr. DeVos, he told us a little bit about how his father lost his job during the Great Depression, and his family was actually forced to move into a small apartment in the attic of his grandparents' house. So he knew struggle from the very beginning. He had grew up in a rough time in American history, and his family had to make many sacrifices to make it through the Depression. It was obviously a rough time for a lot of people. Third of the people in the country without jobs. And his family, even though they had to make very many sacrifices, the dignity and work that they always fought for, that always was maintained, that was continued. And they always recognized the dignity to work and the plight of the less fortunate. So Rich never questioned when his country called in to service, when he went and served in World War II, and then he considered it his duty to help transform the post-war America and global economy. And he did this actually, this kind of spark began in high school. And it began when he met one of his lifelong friends, Jay Van Andel. And Jay Van Andel and Mr. DeVos, they both attended Grand Rapids Christian High School, and they became lifelong friends, business partners, and philanthropists. They went on to form the American Way Association, which later became Amway in 1959, and today is part of Altacor. And they started the Amway Corporation out of their basement in Ada. Actually, it was just a small project, and they both invested their own funds in order to start this company. The company went from offering one product, a multi-purpose household cleaner, in 1959 with $500,000 in sales in its first full year, to offering more than 450 products and services with $8.6 billion in sales for 2017. So obviously very successful. The work that they had put in, the message that they had kind of inspired to sell these products was very successful and created great lives for many people. Amway has over 4 million independent distributors in more than 100 countries and territories around the world, with almost 80% of their sales generated outside of the United States. So he was not just selling to only Americans or Michiganders. He was actually going out and teaching people across the world. Amway was employing people all over the world and selling most of their products outside of the United States. So today, Amway Corporation actually employs more than 17,000 people, and that's not only in Michigan but throughout the world. And it's definitely the #1 direct selling company in the world. It's been very successful, and through its involvement with Altacor, his family has managed to keep Amway growing and has continued to spread free enterprise and spread the sales all over the world. So a lot of people also know that his family owns the Orlando Magic. It's kind of a really interesting, another thing that he's been able to do by owning the basketball team in Orlando. It's been a great benefit for the community down there. So DeVos and his wife, Helen, who passed away in 2017, and along with her children, have donated more than $1.4 billion to charities ranging from colleges, universities, to free market think tanks, hospitals, and churches. So they've not only taken that money that they've been, that they've worked so hard for and lived nice, comfortable lives, but they've given a lot of that money back and have made sure to make that money go a long ways in helping other people and helping people have better lives. At the time of his passing, actually, Forbes magazine listed Mr. DeVos as the 351st wealthiest person in the world with a net worth of $5.4 billion. So even though he was able, to give so much of his money away and to enrich other people's lives with that money, he still, when he passed, he was a very, very wealthy person and was among the, top wealthiest people in the world. So it shows that you don't have to hoard that money or anything. To giving it up really and giving back to other people is very beneficial in many ways, and still was very beneficial for a lot of people, and Mr. DeVos also. Today, the United States remains the world's beacon of liberty and the cornerstone of global capitalism because of entrepreneurs like Rich DeVos. And I'd just like to finish up by saying that a quote from Mr. DeVos was, "Giving is a joyful experience." And people clearly make the difference in this world. And Rich DeVos and his wife Helen can be counted among the world's most exceptional philanthropic difference makers because of what they've done, what they've given, what they've inspired people to do. And that's why we'd like to recognize him and as our Entrepreneur of the Month and a very, very important businessman.
Absolutely, yes. So many of the values that Northwood holds dear, freedom, liberty, personal responsibility, he embodies. Of course, a well-known name at Northwood, providing the naming gift to the Richard DeVos Graduate School of Management. You knew him personally, Dr. Nash.
Oh, I'll tell you, Rich DeVos was everything that Josh said, and even more. And he was a personal hero of mine, an individual that, as Josh noted, he served his country magnificently in World War II, and literally understood all the damage that a war can do, and came back and helped rebuild and grow the American economy. But to that point, over 100 countries around the world, where he created over 4 million entrepreneurs, he and Jay Van Andel. And maybe a little known fact is that there's such a closeness between Amway and Northwood University, because they were both founded in 1959. Our co-founders, Dr. Turner and Dr. Stauffer, knew Mr. Van Andel and Mr. DeVos, and we're very pleased that 2 of the 3 DeVos boys are graduates of Northwood University, and some of the grandkids. And so it's just he's in a better place. He's up in heaven with his wonderful wife, but boy, he's going to be a person who's missed for his wisdom and his kindness.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thinking about the DeVos family, of course, from the Northwood family, as we move forward, that brings us to the conclusion of our show today. We hope you enjoyed a recap of the August economic outlook and the beginning of September, a little foreshadowing, of course, on the Michigan Chamber study, which will be coming out this fall. Have you also keep an eye today out for the Detroit News op-ed on Rich DeVos, written by our own Dr. Nash and our president, Dr. Keith Priddy. That will be running today, and it will be online at detroitnews.com. If you'd like to see recordings of previous shows or get the monthly economic outlook, please visit mcnair.northwood.edu today and shoot us a note at mcnair@northwood.edu if you'd like to weigh in on the show, send questions, or give feedback. Thanks so much for joining us.